So, welcome to episode 2 of Game Dev Live. In today's episode, we'll be continuing where we left off last time, which was like 5 days ago or something, where we started developing a simple game in Unity. Today, we'll be continuing from this with this game. We'll be adding some power-ups. We'll be adding some collision detection and some other neat stuff. So let's just go ahead and get started. If you guys weren't here last time, I'm just going to go ahead and show you real quick a real quick summary of what I did. So if I hit play on this game now, it will compile and start running. And this game is a very simple lander type game where you're this little insect and you need to try to fly around on this little random planet here, and you will need to try to land. The other thing that we did was to make sure that if you're landing too hard, it's getting game over, and if you land on this platform, it's easier to land than on the ground. We wrote a little bit of code. As you can see, I was now able to land properly. I wrote a little bit of code here, as well as creating this insect, this landscape using the terrain tool. This is just a cube as the platform. Then we have a simple user interface indicating our current vertical speed. So if I hit stop here and I go into Visual Studio, you can see the code that we wrote. Basically, the only thing that we did was to write the input, the rotation of the spaceship, as well as adding thrust, and then a particle system that emits particles every time we hold space inside. Then we also made sure that if we collide with a landscape and the impact force is over 1, it's going to be game over. If we collide with the platform, we can have a little bit more impact of nothing more than 2. If it's above this, it will also get game over. And the game over was quite simple. If it's game over, you're not able to handle any of the input, and the user interface will change into this game over text here. Yeah, so that's basically where we left off last time. And today we'll be adding some new cool stuff to this game. So we're gonna go ahead and add some power-ups. We're gonna add some fuel to this thing, so you can't fly forever. So you need to be careful with how much thrust you're using. Then I want to be able to pick up fuel cans from the game scene, and if you pick this one up, you will refuel your spaceship. So to add fuel to the spaceship, we need to add a couple of things. The first thing is a variable that keeps track of the current fuel that we're having. So let's call this fuel. And I'm gonna make this a float, and then a few like that. And I think that I want to be operating in percentage, so I'm gonna set this one to 100, which will be 100%, the maximum amount of fuel. And this fuel will also be visible on the user interface. So I'm gonna go back to, I'm gonna go ahead and save here. I'm going to go back to my game scene here. Let's see, and remember that we added the vertical speed user interface element here. So I'm going to go and move this one a little bit, because right now you can see that it's just glued in the top left corner. I'm going to add a little bit more of a margin here. There we go. And a little bit down. I'm just dragging on the properties I want to change in the inspector here. So pos X, you see that it's highlighted in blue. I can hold the mouse button in, and then I'll just drag it around. You can drag it a lot if you want. Just get something that looks decent. And I'm thinking on the other side here, I'm gonna have the amount of fuel we're having left. So I can go ahead and change the color of our user interface element. This is the vertical speed, so I can set this one to maybe, let's just keep it gray. And I'm going to duplicate this one, so I'm going to select the vertical speed here in the hierarchy and hit Ctrl D. to duplicate it, and then I'm gonna name it fuel. Let's also go ahead and name it fuel indicator. There we go. And I want to keep this one on the top right side of my screen, so I'm going to click top right and set the margins to 0, and then we can move it as we need later. Actually, I'm going to have the same value for position Y here. This is 151 and the negative, the same as vertical, just to have everything symmetrical on the on both sides of the screen. Then I'm gonna drag the position X a little bit down on this side. Then I can select that the alignment of this text should be coming from the right side. Then we need to add a little bit more here. There we go. As you can see, since we're now having the right alignment here, I'm typing from the right side of the screen. So I'm thinking something like fuel. And then the percentage, like 45%. Let's also change the color of this fuel indicator to something like green. We can even go ahead and set this indicator to red if it's less than 10%. I'm gonna try to do that today. So now we're having the user interface. If you go into my game now and hit play, you can see that our fuel indicator is now constantly at 45%. Let's get the percentage from our code into this one instead. So if I'm going back to my code here, I can go to the text element. So now I'm currently in the player handler script that's added to the player. This is basically the script that handles everything in our game, and I'm gonna name this a fuel text. And I want this fuel text to be the reference of the amount of fuel I'm having left and the way that the player sees it on the user interface. So I'm gonna have fuel text here, and let's go ahead and set this one. Dot text equals fuel, and let's go ahead and add our little variable. It was named fuel. There we go. It's now 100. So let's add this one to it. And since this is a float, it can have up to 7 decimals. So I want to format this one so it's a bit less. Let's say we want to have probably 0.0, so we're getting 1 decimal here. And let's call it kilos, the amount of fuel measured in kilos, because we're currently in space. So the next thing I want to do is to make sure that we're using fuel every time we're doing something with the aircraft. So if we're having space inside, that's the main engine thrust, I'm going to reduce the fuel with, say for example, time dot delta time. And then we need to have a fuel modifier here to make sure that the fuel is used a bit more rapid. Right now, we're currently, if I would be holding space inside for 100 seconds, this would get to 0. I don't want the player to have that much time, so let's multiply this by 3. There we go. And I'm also thinking that rotation is also using fuel because it's using the left and right engines for turning, but I want this one to be a lot less, so let's put that one down to 1. So turning isn't as expensive as using the main engines. Okay, let's go and click on the player object here. This is currently our player. Let's focus on that one. Just hover the mouse over the scene view here and click F on the keyboard to focus on the current player. Okay, and you can see that now I'm having the fuel text here. It's waiting for a reference to the UI element, which is our fuel indicator. So I'm just going to drag and drop this one on top of the fuel text and then hit play. Okay, now you can see that I'm using fuel every time I'm doing stuff with the spaceship. So we need to make sure that this will never hit 0. The other thing that I can do is to make sure that if the fuel is less than... So if we're out of fuel, we shouldn't be able to control the spaceship. So I can probably set a new if sentence in here. If fuel is less than, say, 0, less or equal, we should not be able to do any of this input. But I still want to render the vertical speed indicator even though we're out of fuel. So let's reduce the fuel to, say, 20% just to test this. And let's see if I did everything right. Fuel less than 100. Oops, it needs to be the opposite way. If fuel is more than 0, you will be able to control the spaceship. So, creds to those of you who thought about that when I was typing. Okay, let's see. Fuel is 17. Let's control this stuff. There we're going out. 0. I'm trying to control the spaceship, but it's dead. Nothing is happening, and bam, game over. Most likely you will crash if you're going out of fuel, but you might even plan the fuel amount and land with 0 fuel, but it's quite hard. So the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that if it's game over, you will be able to restart the game. So if the game over text is visible, I want to display a simple restart button. So now that we're having the fuel indicator on screen and we're having the logic in the background that if you're going out of fuel, you will not be able to control the spaceship. The other thing is that if we are out of fuel, I want to change the color of our fuel indicator to something else. So if fuel is say less than, say, 10%, I want to set the color of our fuel to red, just to get a visual indicator that, okay, hey, you're pretty much running out of fuel, you need to go ahead and refill. Sometimes you're not paying attention to the user interface, but changing something into a red color will grab your attention. So to do that, I can go into my fuel text here and I can set the color to let's see, color dot red, for example, and if not, I'm just gonna keep it at green. There you go. Save. Let's see if we can get the fuel to... There we have. We're now red. We're soon out of fuel. And there we go. Fuel is depleted. And game over. Okay. Right now, you're able to spend all of your fuel in flying. But we also need a way to refill this one in case the level is longer. And just to have... something to implement here, like power-ups. So I want to go ahead and add a new element to my game. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new cube, and I'm going to call this one fuel tank. Okay, and I'm going to make the fuel tank into Origo, so I'm just going to reset the transform. And I'm going to pull it up so I can see the size compared to my player here. I think the size is pretty good. However, I want to rescale this one a little bit. So let's make it a bit more narrow. And I want to make this look a little bit like a fuel tank, so I can grab this cube here. Let's rotate it a little bit and do some scaling. And I'm using the same rotation tools that we learned in the previous episode to create something that can look a little bit like a fuel tank. Okay. Okay, there's one of the parts, then I'm gonna go ahead and create another one. Just gonna use the same fuel tank cube. And I'm using Control D to duplicate it, just as a refresher from last time. So, something like that. Your 3D artist will be able to create a much better looking fuel tank than what I'm able to do with cubes here. But this is just a mock-up, just so you can, you know, continue creating the game, so you're not stuck. I'm also going to go ahead and add a new cylinder here. Let's see here, cylinder, and I'm going to rotate it. Let's see, along this axis, and scale it. Something like that. Yeah, do you mean that we should have the fuel indication yellow or red? What do you think? I could change it if you guys want. So, this is a very simple fuel tank, and I'm going to add something else to this one. First thing is I'm going to remove all the box colliders, because I don't want to be colliding with power-up. So I'm just going to remove the colliders here, and the same one goes for this one. Or actually, I can keep this one, and I will make it into a trigger. So once we enter this trigger here, we will be able to pick this one up. So I can do resize it a little bit, because it's a trigger, so I should be able to pick it up when we're kind of close to it, something like that probably. And once the fuel tank is in our playfield now, we want to handle some create some logic that triggers once the spaceship is inside of this green box on the fuel tank. So I'm going to go ahead and move this fuel tank a little bit out of the way and a little bit down. There we go. And I'm going to color this fuel tank red later, just to have some color to it. But first I want to make sure that the logic and the code is working. So I'm going to go back to my scene here, and I'm going to create a new function called void on trigger enter. And last time we created this other function called onCollisionEnter with a parameter called collisionOther. This is basically a built-in Unity function that enables me to handle collisions with my object. And this is the same thing. It enables me to handle trigger collisions. Then collider other. The difference is that a trigger is using a collider, while a collision is using collision. So I'm gonna go ahead and if I collide, I want to just output the name of what I'm colliding with, just for debugging. .log other dot gameObject.name, for example. So if I go back into my game world now, and I hit play here, let's move closer to our little fuel tank. There you can see I'm now hit a fuel tank, so that works. So next thing I want to do is that if we're hitting the fuel tank, I want to refuel the amount of fuel we're having. So if I go back to my main scene here now, and let's see here. If I go back into this one now, I can go to my fuel tank, and we need to add a new tag because I want to have, well, last time we created the landscape tag and the platform tag. Everything that's part of the landscape should be tagged with landscape, and every single platform that we want to be landing on is a platform. And let's go ahead and add one for the fuel tank as well. Fuel tank. There we go. We now added a tag to our game named fuel tank. Then I can set this tag to be a fuel tank. And if I go into my logic here, and I'm saying if the thing that we're colliding with is tagged with fuel tank, then we should first of all destroy the tank, and that can be done by calling the destroy function that's built into Unity. It basically destroys any game object you're having in the scene. So I'm just saying, hey, I want to destroy the object that I'm colliding with if it's tagged with fuel tank. And I also want to go ahead and set my fuel back to 100. Now I'm actually refueling the entire tank every time you pick up a fuel tank. You could also go ahead and just add to it. Say, for example, every time you pick up a fuel tank, you get 10% more of fuel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So 30. And then I'm going back to my game here. And let's first of all go ahead and set the color. So I'm going to go to materials, and I'm going to duplicate this blue color, and I'm going to call it red. And I want this fuel tank to be red, very red. And also, let's go ahead and change the shape of my preview image here to a cube, because our fuel tank is looking like a cube. And I want to make this one more metallic, and let's see here, something like that, I think. If you go into the spare mode, you can see the proper metallic look of our fuel tank. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all of these and set the material to red. There we go. We're having a beautiful little fuel tank. The other thing that I want to do is to rotate this fuel tank. We need to add another script to our game. So right click here and create C# script, and let's call it power up rotator. We might add some more powers at a later stage, so I'm just gonna go ahead and create this power up rotator script, and all it does is to rotate everything that you add this script to. So I could add this one to player and it would rotate the player. If I add it to a power up, it will rotate the power up. If I add it to anything in the platform, things will rotate. That's the plan. So I'm just gonna drag this onto my fuel tank here. You can see that it now got our new freshly well-made power-up, the rotator. It doesn't actually do anything yet, so I need to just go ahead and open this one up in Visual Studio. And all it will do is to say that it should try to modify my transform. Let's see. Wait, I need to just make sure that everything is saved and rebuilt here. Okay, I will just do it by form.rotate, and I want to rotate this on the y-axis because it's pointing up towards the sky, and I want to be rotating around that one. So let's go ahead and say vector 3 dot up and multiply it by time dot delta time, and also let's add a speed to it, so say for example 10. Let's go ahead and see if this works. And I'm gonna hit play. Here you can see it's very slowly rotating, so we can probably add the speed a little bit, just make it look a little bit like a power-up. So let's see here, maybe 50. And hit play. Now we'll try to fly a little bit beside it so you guys can see it even though it's lagging. Yeah, as you can see, I know it's lagging, but okay, we need the fuel. You see that I now collected it, and I got 30 more in fuel. So at the moment I can actually duplicate this one. I can place them around my game world. Just make sure that you don't move it into the depth here, because my entire game is working in the, or is operating in the up direction as well as the red one. So Y is the green and X is the red, but Z is just the depth. But we don't do anything with the depth except for the graphics and make it look 3D. This might as well just have been a 2D graphic game. You can change these elements to just 2D sprites. So you would you could use basically the same logic, but with a simple 2D game. So there we go. Now added some fuel tanks to my game. I can just group them together down there, and I can hit play. We need fuel, a lot of fuel. Oh, it was close. Let's try to see if we can land. Stop the power or the speed. Perfect landing. Okay. So once we change our game level to be procedural, we'll also be adding the goal here more procedurally, as well as the fuel tanks. So that's going to be the goal of my next episode. We'll actually just delete this background, or we might move it back so it sticks with the background, and then we'll procedurally generate our level and procedurally place where the goal is, as well as where all the fuel tanks are, to make the game random every single time that you play a level. But before we can do that, I want to just go ahead and add a simple restart button. So every time it's game over, I want this one to be visible. So I can go ahead and create a new button here. Let's go to UI. I'm right-clicking Canvas, UI, and then button. And I'm going to call this one Restart. And let's go ahead and check our game. You can see our button is now visible. And I can move this one down. So I want to center this button in the middle, in the center of the screen. But on the bottom side. So I'm going to click here and then set the position Y to 0, then move it up a little bit. Also, I'm going to set the width so it actually covers a bit more of my screen. And to do that, I'm actually going to do something different. I want this to stretch on the bottom here. So oops. Actually, I want to keep it as I had it, but I want to just set the width quite large. So there we go, and the height should be around 60, and I can move it a little bit up. I think that stretching it would be quite ugly. But in a portrait mode on a mobile phone, it could probably work with a stretch, but on a computer that would be just make the button really big. So we'll get back to the layout once we're starting to export this game to a mobile platform. So here we are, button. I want to change the color of my button a little bit, just to make it match with the game. I can use the color picker to make it match my player. So now it's kind of blue. I want to make it a little bit lighter. And then the color of my text in default mode should be, let's see here, we need to click the text first, should be white. And the size of this text should probably be around 24. And let's call it restart. So now I will teach you how to interact with the main menu. So I'm going to save here, and I'm going to go back to my logic, and let's see here, and I will actually create a new script. So in the scripts folder here, I'm going to right click and create a new C# script. I'm just going to call it, for example, it could be anything but core logic. This is the core logic of my game. Basically that means the menu interactions, restarting of a level, and so on. And maybe even generating the landscape could be in this one. So I'll just drag this new script onto my, for example, camera. It can be anywhere. Actually, I don't like to have things on my camera. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to create a new empty game object. It will be invisible. I'm going to rename it to core logic. And I'm going to drag this one here. Or actually, I will rename it to game handler. Everything that handles or sets up the game will be in this one. So, core logic, I will double click it to open up the script. And I will need to create this function in here called restart. And this is the function that we want to call if we're clicking the restart button. Restart game. And restart we'll call application dot load level, and then we can load the current level we're at by referencing application and loaded level. This is an integer. It's the index of the level that we're currently playing. From a Unity perspective. So I'm going to show you what that means. If I go to build settings, you see that we're only having one level or one scene in the game, and that's main.unity, and it got an index of 0. So Unity operates with scenes as the different menu items or levels or anything you want. You can have one scene for doing your introduction, like an intro movie or your company logo with a nice little animation to it, and then you can load another scene by calling that application.load level function, like for example main menu. And from the main menu, if you click start, you will actually load this level that we're currently working on. So let's go ahead and say that if we're clicking restart, all I want to do is just reload my entire game, this entire scene. So I'm doing that by saying application.load level, and then just load the level that I'm currently having in memory. That's one very simple way of doing it. There's better ways, but then from the restart here, I'm just going to go back to my scene. Clicking this button, you can see that this game object got the transform and an image and the button, and then it has this on-click list, which is empty. So I can add an element to this on-click list by hitting plus here. And what I want to do is that if we're clicking this button, we will be calling a function that's currently on my game handler. And the function is named coreLogic dot. I forgot to make it public. you need to make it public for it to be visible inside of Unity. So public void restart game is the function that we're calling. So going back here, I can now, or I should now be able to see my restart function. Just wait for it to refresh. Call logic, restart game, and for the question in the chat here, I'm using Pro, but everything that you're doing here can be done with the personal edition as well, so there's no difference. I will not use any Pro functions in this stream or in this series here. So let's just go ahead and see if I can redo this. Oh yeah, I can see that it's opened in this weird way, so it hasn't really been saved, so I need to save all to do that. That's my issue. Okay, sorry about that. Let me close this one and reopen the script, so I don't get that same issue anymore. There we go, it's now opened in the normal way, so I can save it using Control S, and then we should be able to call that function from my core logic, restart game. So I'm just going to test the functionality before we hide the button, because right now it's visible all the time. So if I click restart now, you can see that my game is now restarted. So I want to go into my logic here. The first thing is I want to make this one hidden in the start, and then with some logic I want to show it. So if we're game over, I want to show that button. So if I go to my player handler script again, I can go back to the variables, and I'm going to create a new button, and I'm going to call it restart game button. Okay, and this restart game button should only be visible if is game over. So let's go ahead and make sure that our button is visible in the same else. So I'm just gonna show you this. I'm just gonna see. So if it's not game over, then we can do the control and we're updating the user interface. Let's put this one to yellow, as that's the feedback I got from the chat. And if it's, so this is if it's not game over, but if it is game over, I want to show this button. So then I can go to the game object that set active, and true. Just recompiling here. So now that we got the logic, we just need to set the UI element. So you can see restart game button is looking for a button. So I will just drag this one on there, and then I'm just gonna play the game. And once it's falling down, it's lagging for you guys, but you'll still be able to see it. You can see it's now game over, and I'm having the restart button here. Hitting restart, it somehow gets a little bit darker here, but I will fix that. It's probably because of this baked mode here. I'm not sure. There's probably something wrong with my system. I need to do a reboot probably, but I'm currently at the point where I'm in the end of this session, so I will try to see if I get time to do that one little last thing. Yeah. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to be doing today is to just make sure that everything is working as it should. So basically our player is affected by gravity, and the gravity setting is, as you can remember from my last episode, if you go to edit, project settings, and then physics, you can see that the gravity is minus 1.41, and we're adding thrust to make sure that we're fighting against that gravity. You can also turn it to move around on your game level, and then you can pick up these fuel cans to make sure that you're never running out of fuel. And also you will be able to land on this platform easier than landing on the ground. So if you go into my logic here, you can see that it's easier to land on the platform than on the ground because the threshold is twice as much. So you can basically land with an impact of 2 meters per second versus 1 on landscape. So this opens up some cool things. You can add caves to your game, and you can fly into the caves and land inside of the campground to do something. Then you can fly back up, pick up some more fuel, and then land on the platform. And I'm thinking, should we be yeah, the recording will be uploaded to YouTube. Yeah, okay. Hey, sorry I didn't see the chat right now because chat comments here as I was chatting so much. I totally agree. So let's go ahead and add that. If the fuel is, let's see here, what did you guys roll? Right, so less than 20 is going to be yellow, and if it's less than 10, and let's go ahead and also add this one. If it's less than 20 but fuel is higher than 10, then it's going to be yellow. If it's less than 10 or equals, then it's going to be red. Awesome. Good input, guys. Thank you very much. Let's test this and see how it works. So I'm also going to be testing everything that I mentioned earlier just to see that my core logic is working. So I can add anything. You can see that I'm currently having yellow in fuel. Going below 10 turns it to red. Picking up will take it up to green again. Awesome. There we go. Okay, I see one bug in the game actually. And that bug is that we're actually able to pick up the fuel can sometimes, like 2 times before it's actually destroyed. So there's another function called destroy immediate, which destroys the fuel tank immediately. Destroy waits for a good timing, so it gets destroyed at the right timing compared to the how the Unity engine works. But destroy immediate just takes it away immediately. So let's go ahead and hit play again, and let's see if it does that again. Oh yeah, okay. That didn't work. Yeah. So I need to solve this in another way. And to do that, I can set a timer. This is a very weird way of doing this, but just because of time, I might probably change this later. But this is a good way of doing things sometimes. So just for prototyping. So for example, let's say we have a fuel tank pickup timer, and I'm gonna set this one to say, for example, 0.0 at first, and I'm gonna let's put this to 1. And every time we pick up a fuel tank, I'm gonna set this one to 1. So in my game logic here, in update, I want to reduce this one with time.delta time. There we go. So what's happening now is that I will not be able to pick up a fuel tank, more than one fuel tank per second. And I will change the way this is implemented, but I just want to show you the issue that we're having. So every time I'm picking up the fuel tank, I set the timer to 1, so that we need to wait 1 more second before we're able to pick up another fuel tank. So this is now 1. And for every frame, we'll be reducing this one to going down. And if this is less than 0, let's see here, is less than 0, then we will go ahead and pick up the fuel tank. Hello, Head Show. Thank you everyone for watching today, by the way. It's awesome to see this many people attending and even giving me some comments and feedback as we're developing this game. Feel free to give even more stuff. We can change everything based on what you guys want. I'm doing this for you guys, so if you guys want something changed in this game, go ahead and let me know. Here you can see that now I'm only getting the fuel cans once, and it's working the way we intended. The only issue is that we're now able to only pick up 1 fuel tank per second, but I don't think that's a huge issue, because right now you will never need to pick up more than 1 fuel tank every second. Alright, here we are, landed at the platform. That concludes today's episode. I managed to stay within the time today, and no crashing on my hardware. Last time my computer crashed in the middle of the show and I had to do a restart. Luckily that didn't happen today. Unfortunately, we're having a bit of a lag, so I'm not sure why that is happening, so I will need to go ahead and find out. As I said, this series is an introduction to Unity. Hopefully it helps you get started with Unity, but it's also for me a pilot on doing streams, because this is my second time in my life where I'm actually doing a stream. The last time was last week when I did episode 1. By the way, if you guys haven't seen episode 1 yet, you can go ahead and do that. It could be found on the YouTube channel. You can see it just down there. Just click YouTube on the link there and it will open up. Anyway, thank you again. I hope that you learned something. I will be I'm not sure when I'll be doing the next episode, because I'm currently in the United States. I'm living here in Seattle, but as you can hear from my accent, I'm Norwegian. I'm having a very Norwegian English accent. So I'm going to be traveling to Europe to celebrate Christmas with my family. So I'm not sure when I will be picking up this episode or this series again. Probably I will be streaming another episode next week. But we will see. It might be on like Wednesday. I'm traveling in the end of this week, so I will be jet lagged on Monday. So probably Tuesday or Wednesday next week we'll be making episode 3, and that episode, you guys, will be awesome, because we will be procedurally generating the landscape using cubes and Berlin noise. That's the same algorithm that the guys at Minecraft is using to generate their world. I'm gonna show you how that works. It's very simple, and then we're gonna be procedurally placing our goal somewhere on this planet, as well as fuel tanks, to make sure that we're moving forward. Alright, appreciate once again your time for watching me today, and hopefully you learned something. I see a lot of hearts in the chat, appreciate it. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab some coffee and some lunch. So until next time, enjoy this game. I'll be uploading the source code to GitHub. Just click the link below, as well as the episode. Cheers.